this is mainly linked to American historiography as well, where attention has been given to Lafayette, but not too much to
Hmm.
a monarchy that helped them establish a republic, especially in the 19th century when the national story of the United States had to be written, sort of
Hmm.
nationalism had to be installed. The French were quite deliberately pushed, not totally out, but it was not the forefront of the story.
I'm Susan Spurlock, Executive Director of Ford Hall Forum at Suffolk University, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's program. For more than a century, Ford Hall Forum has created space for public conversation about the ideas, struggles, and people that shape democracy. At its best, history does not simply tell us what happened in the past. It challenges us to reconsider who belongs in our national story, whose voices have been forgotten, and how complicated the idea of patriotism can really be. Tonight's conversation embodies that mission beautifully. Improbable Patriot tells a remarkable and deeply human story, one that complicates easy narratives about identity, loyalty, freedom, and nationhood. At the center of the story is Pierre-Augustin Caron de Beaumarchais, playwright, businessman, spy, diplomat, arms dealer, an unlikely supporter of the American Revolution. Best known to many as the author of The Barber of Seville and The Marriage of Figaro, Beaumarchais was also instrumental in secretly helping supply the American colonists before the French formally entered the war. His life feels almost impossible to characterize. He moved between worlds, art and politics, theater and espionage, monarchy and revolution. He believed deeply in liberty and individual rights, yet operated within royal courts and international intrigue. What makes this story so compelling is not simply its drama, although there was plenty of that, but the way it forces us to rethink the origins of the American Revolution. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by famous generals and history and presidents, but also by complicated international networks, improbable alliances, and individuals whose contributions have often been overlooked. At a moment when questions about citizenship, belonging, democracy, and historical memory remain deeply contested, this story feels especially timely. It asks us to think carefully about what it means to be a patriot, who gets recognized as one, and how history often overlooks people whose lives do not fit neatly into familiar narratives. We are especially honored tonight to welcome noted historians Iris DeRode, who wrote the foreword to the book and has helped bring renewed attention to this extraordinary story, who will be in conversation with Robert Alison, one of Boston's most respected public historians and a longtime friend of Ford Hall Forum. I'd like to recognize the evening's co-sponsors, the Brandeis University Press and GBH Forum Network. I'd also like to thank the Lowell Institute, whose generous funding makes programs like this possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce Sue Raymond, the director of the Brandeis University Press, who will introduce Iris and Bob.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you so much for inviting us again to the Ford Hall Forum Network. In actual fact, this is the third year of our Brandeis University Press, GBH, Fort Hall Forum book series. So, and the last one of this season. So thank you. Professor Alison is a professor of history at Suffolk University. He also teaches in the Harvard Extension School. He's written a series of short books about the American Revolution, on the histories of Boston and Cape Cod, as well as longer works on the Barbary Wars and the naval hero Stephen Decatur. He edited an edition of this is going to be a tough one, The Interesting Narrative of
Olaude Equiano.
Thank you. Or Gustavus Vassa, the African. Thank you for that help. Alison created 2 classes for the Teaching Company's series, The Great Courses on Colonial America, before 1776, Life in the American Colonies, and The Age of Benjamin Franklin, drawn from his teaching, which has covered all phases of American history, though his primary focus is the American Revolution and the early American Republic. He is president of the Colonial Society of Massachusetts, a scholarly organization which publishes primary documents on early American history, a life trustee of the USS Constitution Museum, and as chair of Revolution 250, Professor Alison hosts its weekly podcast, a series of conversations on the revolution with historians, museum curators, and reenactors. So I can assure you are in very good hands tonight to hear the improbable story, but real story of the Improbable Patriot. And Professor Alison will now introduce Iris de Rode. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sue, and thank you, Susan, and thank you to the Fort Hall Forum for sponsoring this along with WGBH, and to Brandeis University Press for reissuing this great book and finding Iris de Rode to write the foreword to it. Because when this is really a book about a very important person in the French-American alliance, and Iris de Rode is really one of the premier scholars of the French-American alliance. She's actually Dutch by origin. She is a permanent resident now of the United States, living in Washington, D.C., where she is a Gibson postdoctoral fellow at the Karsh Institute of Democracy at the University of Virginia, very well known at various Washington research institutions as she is pursuing work on her forthcoming book, The General and the Chevalier, How the Franco-American Alliance Was Made During the American Revolution, which is an expansion of her doctoral dissertation on François-Jean de Chastellux, who was a soldier philosopher. Actually, the French title is, I will translate it, a soldier philosopher in the Atlantic world during the Enlightenment era. And it really captures that period, that extraordinary period, which also, of course, produces Beaumarchais and the Revolution. Her dissertation received the award Prix Guizot from the Académie Française in 2023. And so it's really always a pleasure to talk to Iris de Rode. And I'm really happy that she was able to find the time to write the introduction to this new edition of Harlow Unger's book, Improbable Patriot. So Iris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Robert, for this introduction, and thank you for the organizers and the sponsors to do sort of a launch of the second edition of the book. So, and thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to go talk about Improbable Patriot.
Okay, so you and I are kind of immersed in the revolution, and to us, Beaumarchais is not an unknown figure. Why do you suppose he has been kind of unknown to a wider public, which knows a lot about Lafayette?
Very true. I think a broad question, because you could say the same thing for most of the French aid. For the larger, like the real large public, Lafayette is known, Rochambeau might be, but most other Frenchmen have been quite forgotten that have played equally important roles or different types of roles for the American Revolution. One of the main reasons is Lafayette did take a lot of the attention. He became a symbol. Many reasons for that, which we don't have really time to all go over, but the fact is he really became that symbol for the French aid, and most people associate French aid with him. But of course, with him, behind him are thousands of others. And so this is mainly linked to American historiography as well, where attention has been given to Lafayette, but not too much to a monarchy that helped them establish a republic, especially in the 19th century when the national story of the United States had to be written, sort of nationalism had to be installed. The French were quite deliberately pushed, not totally out, but it was not the forefront of the story. And
Mhm.
especially Beaumarchais, of course, operated in secret networks. He operated in the shadows of the French government. He was involved in many schemes we're going to all discuss. But so he was not an official representative of that French aid. He was not a Lafayette that was a volunteer in the Continental Army that sacrificed many things to be able to fight in America. He was not one of the generals sent to America who was very visible on the American soil, such as Rochambeau or de Grasse, that would sail here, of
Mhm.
course, to block Cornwallis and so on. So he's a lesser known figure, mainly remembered for playwrights, but not for
Mhm.
much more.
Mhm. And there's a lot more.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, he invents a device that helps watches move more easily. And in fact, he may be the father of the pocket watch or the wristwatch.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and,
Yeah, I
and
think
then
that's an interesting part where this book from Harlow Unger, sorry, he starts with his entire career, but he also describes Beaumarchais in a way that he uses at least, I think, 20, 40 different words to describe Beaumarchais
yes,
as a indeed watchmaker, but so much more. So he is an
yes,
intriguing figure. Yeah.
he really is. And as you read the book, it's one improbable episode after another, and you wonder, could a novelist make this up? And would you think this is a believable character? Yes.
I agree. It's one of these when you watch a film and you're like, no, this is getting too
Mhm.
much. This is not credible anymore. You kind of don't want to watch it end. This is
Mhm.
almost the same story because he starts off as, of course, so he's a watchmaker, becomes very famous fast because he
Mhm.
invents, as you just mentioned, the wristwatch, or at least he claims,
Mhm.
who knows
Yeah.
really who was the first, but he became known for
Mhm.
that fact. He actually talked to the watchmaker of the French king and they explained this his new invention,
Mhm.
and that French king's watchmaker stole his idea, and he had
Yes.
public scandal to say it's
Yeah.
actually my invention.
Yeah.
So that's how his career started. He became
Yeah.
known to claim that invention, and then the king Louis XV started to order different
Mhm.
watches for himself, for his main mistress, Madame de
Mhm.
Pompadour, and his children, which then made him famous. But then afterwards, he falls again for many reasons, and he reinvents himself by reinventing a harp, as in
Mm.
musical
Yes.
instruments, and then becomes really famous again on that episode and
Mhm.
becomes the teacher of the daughters of the French king Louis XV. And so these are the two little examples of his beginning of
Yeah.
his life
Yes.
where he is a commoner, so he's not an
Mhm.
aristocrat, and he is not easily accepted nor
Mhm.
adopted by the French court, but he
Mhm.
makes sure he is.
Yes. And Harlow Unger does make much of the kind of class resentment there, that he is really not liked by others in the French nobility or those who want to be because he is making it and they are not. Is that, do you think, an exaggeration on his part, or would that be a genuine, that this is something that's definitely part of Beaumarchais' persona?
I think so. It might be a little exaggerated that sort of everybody despised the man
Yeah.
at court. There must have been friendly people or people that just didn't care, I would
Hmm.
assume. So I think little nuance can be in place. But what I do know from my own studies on the French court, being someone that was not from aristocracy was complicated, but especially if you didn't know the social code, if you were
Hmm.
not totally familiar with what to wear, how to speak, how to behave, how
Right.
to
Yeah.
dance, how
Yeah.
to address particular people. And so he is described at the beginning of the book as a little clumsy in that, as in maybe
Yes.
paying too much attention. And I can
Hmm.
imagine that just was he was one of the arrivistes in on the French court, and
Hmm.
as you said too, a lot of others tried to get a similar position but didn't become that close to the king as fast. So a lot of jealousy and a lot of gossip and a lot of misinformation about him
Hmm.
started to circulate. And I do think that is very plausible because you see a lot of that type of people that,
Hmm.
first of all, the older nobility is looking down upon the
Yeah.
younger nobility, the higher on the lower. And there's a lot of competition because Versailles is, of course, a place where the court of France, so most aristocrats need to appear at certain times, and they all need something from the king. They all need favors in order to rise in the
Hmm.
ranks of the military or the administration or the church. You need royal favors. So there's
Hmm.
too many people that need too much from one king. So I can really
Hmm.
imagine that competition happening.
Do you think this makes stick with the American Revolution. I was going to ask a question about the French Revolution, but which
Uh-huh.
I guess is a story for another day.
Yeah.
He does, again, he is a watchmaker because his father was a watchmaker. And there's a story about the Queen when astonished to hear that Benjamin Franklin, the American envoy, was a printer. And how does this happen?
Mm.
And then, of course, his great play is about Figaro, this character who is really mocking this aristocracy. And I guess the big question I have in this is how does he keep getting, he has this real effrontery. When the king's watchmaker says, I invented this, he takes him on. And then later on, when Beaumarchais actually winds up in jail, he writes a series of pamphlets about this judge whom he bribed. I mean, it's astonishing that someone has the effrontery to take on this French system in this way and succeed.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Very surprising sometimes because you could imagine that because he was a playwright, so he was a very
Yeah.
apparently a very convincing, well, author, orator,
Mm.
very apparently very he was absolutely handsome. It's what a lot of these
Yes.
accounts say. He was very charismatic. He was very witty, very funny, very artistic. He was a great playwright, but also a musician, and so on. So he was apparently a really charming man that could get away with things. But I also think he
Hmm.
was a real fighter. He would not
Yes.
let people take things from him. He would not,
Hmm.
when he was, there's a whole long story of him having sort of a mentor figure at court that became his business partner, and that's how he started to make a big
Yes.
career in trade. But when
Hmm.
he died, the cousin of this man or nephew, a
Yes.
family
Yeah.
member who inherited his entire sort of trade empire that Beaumarchais had been so involved in, took revenge. He did not want Beaumarchais to have that much influence.
Hmm.
So he started to attack him. He started to
Hmm.
invent things, and that's how he ended up
Hmm.
being in the different court
Hmm.
problems. He started to get imprisoned, but also for other reasons that were like
Hmm.
other people that attacked him at the same time.
Hmm.
And it feels, reading Unger, all very unjust. It feels like
Yes.
just
Yeah.
people that attack him
Hmm.
because he's too popular, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it is surprising, as you say, because he is fighting for justice. He is
Hmm.
fighting for himself. And you could imagine that Louis XV and after him, Louis XVI were like, let's put him in prison like so many
Hmm.
others. A lot of people were exiled or
Yes.
censored if they started to criticize the system.
Hmm.
But I think he did it in a clever way because it was
Hmm.
mainly through theater as well. And
Yeah.
that was one space where you could criticize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And he invokes Voltaire, of course, who had a similar trajectory. And then one of his plays, The King wants to ban it, but the Queen thinks it's hilarious.
Mhm, mhm,
And it's,
exactly. And also, we shouldn't forget that there's a large part of aristocracy, especially at the end of the 1780s, early 1770s as
mhm.
well, but mainly the 80s, where the French aristocracy is becoming quite progressive and quite enlightened. And
Yeah.
there's a larger and larger group of aristocrats that start to criticize the system. And
Hmm.
Louis XVI wants to reform the absolute
Right.
monarchy. There are real call for reforms, and so he's not sort of on his own crying out against the system. It's a larger movement of which a lot of the French philosophers are part, but especially people at court. And so
Right.
I think he represents a larger group that is
Hmm.
just wants change. They don't want to overthrow, they want to change.
Right. 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 He he gets involved in the American War, and Lafayette, of course, we know has this love for America, for liberty, and Beaumarchais' trajectory seems different. He goes to England for another reason, but he and Vergennes see this as a way of actually undermining the British. And the book begins actually for Americans in really a dark time, the end of 1776, when the whole thing seems to be over, and Vergennes keeps hearing the rebellion is over, and he gets this letter from Beaumarchais saying we have to help the Americans by shipping them arms. Is his goal then to establish an American republic, or is it to help France counter the overweening power of Britain?
Hmm. Um, it's always interesting what the real motivations are,
Yeah,
because of course
yeah.
Beaumarchais, you can see that he was he was himself had been, let's call it, bullied by aristocracy. He had been oppressed by
Mhm.
aristocracy. He had made it up in the king's chambers, but at the same time always. So there's a tension
Yeah.
there. He was for liberties, freedoms,
Hmm.
equalities. for sure, I think. And in his theater plays, you can see that too, in his writing, in his correspondence that Unger has studied. There is a real, I think, motivation of idealism, but
Hmm.
his main motivation between the lines seems to be to earn a lot of money.
Yeah,
Think
yeah.
that's my own reading. When you start looking at this, you're like, well, it of course he might have been inspired, but he saw serious opportunity to make
Yeah.
millions.
Yes.
Really work out exactly how he hoped, but there was a real hope for money. And I think one of the things I learned from this book was people such as Franklin, Dean, and Lee, they were all so these are the envoys from Congress that
Yeah.
were supposed to get aid from France. They would get 5% of everything they would get
Hmm.
to it. And I didn't realize that much that it was for most people also a financial opportunity.
Hmm.
Of course,
Yeah.
that's often the case, but Unger really shows that well. And I think
Yes.
Beaumarchais, driven by idealism, driven by, of course, knowing that the French want revenge. I'm not sure he was that much into
Hmm.
against British, but I
Yeah.
think he knew very, very well that there was a serious anti-British sentiment. And Vergennes, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Louis XVI,
Hmm.
he was absolutely driven by that want, not necessarily of just taking revenge for the war that was previously the Seven
Hmm.
Years' War, which was from 56 to 7063, in America called the French and Indian War.
Yes.
After that, France lost almost all its territories and especially its prestige. And from the moment of Louis XV already, so 7063, at the end of the war, someone called Choiseul, the Minister of Foreign Affairs at that
Hmm.
time, started to really look at the tensions in the 13 colonies as an opportunity to weaken
Hmm.
the British. And
Yes.
Vergennes, his successor under Louis XVI, also sees that. And
Hmm.
Beaumarchais knows that very
Yeah.
well
Yeah.
and sees opportunities, I would say.
And he hopes to get rich by this, but he fails because the Americans after the war say, no, no, this was all a gift. It wasn't a sale.
Yeah.
And
And I think it's before talking about that part, I think the things for the audience to realize too is Beaumarchais did send a lot of weapons,
yes.
a lot of
Hmm.
money, a lot of gunpowder. The American cause was, as Unger describes very well, at certain moments
Hmm.
almost like it couldn't continue. There's almost the end of the American Revolution because there's just no money, there's no
Yeah.
gunpowder, there's no weapons. Certain moments you can follow through 75, 6, 7, 8,
Hmm.
where really if there's no extra aid coming, it's going to be
Hmm.
the end. And this
Yeah.
is when Beaumarchais creates this huge, almost navy, he calls it the Navy, but he has a
Hmm.
fleet that goes do a lot of, well, we'll talk about what that really was.
Yeah. Yeah.
He sends a lot. And so he is getting a lot of money out of it too. But then the problem becomes that, again, there will be people against him as during his
Yes.
life,
Right.
especially Arthur Lee hoped
Hmm.
to make a lot of money. So Arthur Lee is also an envoy of the Americans to
And
France. And well, long story, but the point is he's also very jealous of
yes, he is. He is.
Beaumarchais. He wanted to make money, he can't. And so
Hmm.
Beaumarchais is um, he's investing a lot of personal money.
Hmm.
Got a loan from France for 1 million and then another loan from
Hmm.
Spain to start a fake trading
Right. Yeah.
company to give secret aid. And we can talk about why. But the point,
Yes.
he hoped to get a lot of money out of that. But then US Congress was like, well, if the French king gave that to you, why would we reimburse you? But then in the
Right.
meantime, he had already loaned about 27 million, if I'm correct, like a huge number. So he
Yes.
really invested a lot, hoping Congress would pay him back,
Hmm.
and that also when he would send ships to America with weapons, then in the way back, a lot of cargo would come with, for instance, tobacco and
Right.
sugar and other
Hmm.
produce. And so he saw a way of making a lot of money, but he would not do that. And the Congress refused to pay him back. And so he had a huge debt based on this.
Hmm. Yeah. And we should say a little bit about Harlow Unger, the author of the book,
Yeah.
because he had a career as a journalist and then became really a prolific writer of very good histories, very perceptive histories. You want to tell us a little bit more about who he
Mhm.
was?
Yeah, so he wrote, if I'm correct, 27 books. And
Yes.
us as authors know how many that is, as
Yeah.
because most at least I'm spending many years writing just
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And so I'm on my book now, and I would never write 27. I
Don't
don't.
say that. You've got plenty of time.
Yeah. But you see it's an impressive amount of books, and he wrote on many different topics, including, of course, this one, Improbable
Mm-hmm.
Patriot.
Yes.
But he also wrote, I think, very good biography on Lafayette,
Mm-hmm.
but on Patrick Henry, on Washington, of course, Benjamin Rush, Henry Clay. I'm looking at my phone right now because I wrote
Yes. Yeah.
down John Marshall,
Mm.
the Boston Tea Party, and so on. So he just wrote
Yeah.
many books about almost all these characters of the American
Yes. Yeah.
Revolution. And what I personally like about his style is he makes it very vivid. There's
Yes.
times, moments I find him really funny. He has some
Mm.
sort of personal comments that are quite funny.
Yes.
He is doing thorough research. He's lived a
Mm-hmm.
lot in Paris, so he could do research in France,
Mm-hmm.
which is not the case for all American historians that
Right.
work on the topic.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he could read and so for this book, just to go back to Improbable
Mm-hmm.
Patriot, he had access to the private papers of Beaumarchais that were edited by a French author called, I will tell you very fast here, it's called Louis de Lomenie.
Mm-hmm.
In 1853, he had written a biography based on the actual papers, and so he had access to these papers. But afterwards, they were all dispersed. But so the point
Mm-hmm.
is that Unger did research in these French papers, or at least the copies made
Mm-hmm.
by this other person.
Yeah.
And so he was the first to really start doing research here on
Mm-hmm.
these. And yeah, he did a lot of research on Beaumarchais that had at the time been unpublished. Now there's been a bit more that has come out about Beaumarchais in the more recent years. There's a French professor that had found quite a lot of Beaumarchais papers in the family
Mm-hmm.
archive, who is working right now on a new biography in French, at least. So
Okay.
there's some renewed research, but the fact is, Unger really did a lot of original research on
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Beaumarchais and makes them, as you said, it reads like a novel
Mm-hmm.
where you just think every time, like, no, this is not possible.
Yeah. 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 He goes to London and he's to find out more about the Brit. Actually, he's on this mysterious mission to London, and everything is there's always a double meaning to what he is doing. And he is a playwright who writes these farces with these improbable plots, but then he's involved in all of these. He's able to create these improbable ways out of jams. But he's meeting with John Wilkes, and there he meets the Chevalier d'Eon, who's one of the most extraordinary characters of the period.
Yeah.
And then also one of the British foreign ministers is someone he knew because he had been the ambassador to Spain when Beaumarchais had gone there on a money-making scheme because the French wanted to a colony and to sell slaves in Louisiana. Now I'm
Yeah.
really telling too much of the story, but also Beaumarchais' younger sister had been seduced and abandoned by a dissolute Spaniard, so he's going to take revenge. So you have all these things that you think this could be on the stage.
Absolutely. And while reading it, you want it to become his own life. You want it to be a theater play, if not a movie, because this is
Right. Yes.
such a good story. And what you're saying too is he's sent as a first secret mission of his life is during Louis XV, there's a scandal, and there's like this journalist that is going
Right.
to maybe tell secret stories about his new mistress of the king,
Right.
who apparently was a
Yeah.
prostitute, and
Yeah.
Madame du Barry was quite famous, of course.
Yes.
And then Beaumarchais is sent to find this man, to pay him, to bribe him, to destroy all the evidence.
Yeah.
These are the things he's involved
Yes.
in. And then the second mission is Louis XVI that also wants him to
Yeah.
stop for
Yeah.
things to get published. And so
Yes.
he is always in these sort of margins of secret missions. And Vergennes, of course, uh, so that's the Minister of Foreign Affairs that
Yes.
believes the American Revolution is something that needs to be nurtured by France. This is when, of course, he is the perfect figure for this because he knows
Yes.
how to do things secretly. He has a good network. He knows truth because he's been in it. But also, what's interesting about it is that he knew all these things, but he was also known as a theater maker. So
Yes.
one of the first shipments he would send was with decors of his own theater,
Right.
which
Yeah.
just he hid things
Yeah. Yeah.
under there, you know. So these are these beautiful stories where you can understand how that French aid, and maybe for the listeners here, or the viewers, is that the French official alliances in 1778, but
Mm,
3 years before that, and particularly 1776, is when Beaumarchais starts his secret sending of weapons and arms and
mhm,
gunpowder and cloth for uniform, tents,
mm,
everything, um, in a way that really created a serious change for the for the American
mm,
Revolution.
mhm.
Particularly, for instance, the Battle of Saratoga
Yeah,
was really influenced by the fact that they had many more weapons than they would have ever had because of Beaumarchais directly.
right.
So he
Yeah,
really had a serious impact on the American Revolution with the secret sending of aid. And then from the 1778 onwards, the official French alliance
mm,
comes
right.
in because the French were not ready before. They were afraid of being in war because their own armies were not ready yet. They
Right.
would be, anyway, all these things are explained very well in
Yeah,
the book, so you can read
they
it.
are. They are. Yeah.
Yeah, but so the point is really that Beaumarchais did play a very influential role for the outcome of the revolution.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting because Saratoga is the victory at Saratoga is how the French then are convinced that the Americans can win.
Mm.
But would they have been able to win at Saratoga without the clandestine aid that Beaumarchais had been providing?
Well, not really, or at
Yeah.
least who knows, but probably
Yeah.
not. And I think what's also interesting is in the American public memory, or yeah, the
Mm,
historiography about Saratoga, it really seems like Saratoga is the moment when the French entered, when the French got interested in the American Revolution.
yeah.
But by looking at Beaumarchais, you can see that
Mm,
the origin is much older, much more
hmm.
complex, and was already
Yeah.
well underway. So it's not Saratoga that convinced them, it's just that it was a moment where they won, and then the
Mm,
French decided to
mm.
send even more aid. But of course, it's not as simple as, oh, they won the
No,
war, the French came, here we go.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. And of course, at the same time as the Americans win at Saratoga, they lose Philadelphia, they lose the capital. So you could think that could have equally said the French, no, they can't win. So
Exactly.
Saratoga is convincing them that they can.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also coinciding, and this is not in Unger's book because it's not about that entire story, but it is Saratoga coincides with all the reform movements and all the rebuilding that France is doing of their army and their navy. And
Right.
this is a moment when Vergennes and even Louis XVI realizes, okay, we are ready to wage a war again. After the Seven
Yeah.
Years' War, they needed about 18 years to recover from that.
Right.
And so they rebuilt and reformed,
Mm,
and that is really the moment France is ready. So it's a good
mm,
moment for France
mm,
to become more involved, and so that is also the moment for Beaumarchais to it ends for him to be in the sort of clandestine networks where everything has to be
mhm,
hidden and secret, and he has to pay all these different figures, sort of
mhm,
shady stories to get
mhm,
secret aid to America.
mhm,
But during the period of the Open Alliance, he is
mhm,
going to create a even bigger fleet and invest even more, hoping he would get a lot of money back.
mm.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But he remains kind of supplying after the French now are in the war and have recognized American independence. So,
Yes, yes. He is throughout the entire war really one of those figures, really
mm,
invested in the trade in the weapons, in gunpowder, providing money and loans. He's working especially with Silas Deane in that
mm,
endeavor, not
mm,
with Franklin. Apparently,
yeah.
Franklin did not want to work with him. Franklin
Mm,
wanted to also make money. He knew he
yeah.
was not going to do that with
Mhm,
Beaumarchais.
mhm,
And so yeah, he's very invested from the beginning to the end in this
mhm,
endeavor. And at the end of his life, he still hopes to get money back.
mhm,
He will not get it back. He got some back
mhm,
from the French king. He got a little bit back as well
mhm,
from Congress, but the most of his
mhm.
millions were, yeah, invested.
I'm wondering, of course, Congress cashier Silas Deane thinking he was profiteering, but you're making it seem as though everyone had their hand out.
I would say yes, which is that is more in Unger's research than in my own.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
don't really know much about the topic, but what I
The
think.
Chevalier Chateleux never took anything for his services.
No, but he was very much involved in this whole secret
Yes,
period as
he
well.
was. He was.
He
Yes.
was, so Chateauneuf is someone that would become the major general of the French army.
Mhm.
He's the one I wrote a biography on.
Yes.
And he was also one of the agents sent to England 3 times
Mm.
at the same time as Beaumarchais. They must have been at
Hmm.
the same places. And on top of that, what's really interesting, what makes me think more and more about the importance of theater as a means to protest against governments, or at least awaken
Hmm.
spirits against governments that are doing things you don't want, is that Châtelet wrote 7 theater plays at the same
Is that
time.
right?
Yes.
Wow.
And so you can see that theater serves as a disguise for agents,
Mm,
because he was also a secret agent sent by Louis
mm,
XV
mhm,
to observe the reactions to the North American tensions in London itself.
mhm,
And so these were networks of people that were sent by the French king to see how can we take advantage of what's going
mhm,
on in America? What are the reactions in Great Britain? Can we
mhm,
attack Great Britain itself? Beaumarchais also made an assessment of what if we attack the British coast? Châteauneuf did that as well. And so just
mhm.
to say is this is a network of several people.
Yes.
Châteauneuf was not involved in the all the secret trade, just by the
Mhm.
simple fact that he was not absolutely not allowed to do trade because he was an aristocrat, and
Yes.
Beaumarchais was not. And an aristocrat was not supposed to be involved in trade because making money on trade would lead to the fall of all his privileges.
Wow.
And
It's
he would have
amazing.
done it, I'm sure, if he could have, but he,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting, and it's interesting. The king's not just going to send one person; he's going to send many. And much of what we know about what was happening in the 1760s is because of the French spies who were here. That I think it was the Baron de Cobb who witnesses Patrick Henry's oration in the Virginia Assembly, and we have other episodes of the French reporting back on
Mhm.
you know, are these divisions big enough? Are they more angry at the crown or at one another? And should we support them? Is, I guess, the
Yeah.
big question the French have.
Exactly. And Beaumarchais plays a very influential role in that debate. He's not sent to North America, but he is sent
Hmm.
to Great Britain, as we said. And so, but he is writing sort of pleas really to be like, we have to support them. He gets really inspired by it. And then he starts to write directly a lot with Vergennes, but also a lot to Louis XVI himself. And so
Hmm.
we've spoken about Louis XV and XVI sort of in a mix, but Louis XV is up until 1774, and then Louis XVI comes in. And Beaumarchais has been involved in with both monarchs,
Hmm.
but the most important becomes Louis XVI because the revolution is starting to really
Yeah.
evolve and become a radical movement, becomes a war, and so on.
Hmm.
And that is when Louis XVI starts to support it. And that's when Beaumarchais, because Louis XVI doesn't want a war, he is
Right. Yeah.
very afraid of a war because he's
Hmm.
afraid, what if we lose again? France is almost bankrupt. He needs to recreate. He inherits this huge, well, monarchy slash empire, which is quite diminished under Louis XV.
Hmm.
Wants to revitalize that, and a war in America for him is too dangerous. But then
Hmm.
Vergennes, as well as Beaumarchais, do actually convince him he needs to go do it.
Interesting. Interesting. We have a couple of questions from viewers. Here are two that are somewhat related. Terry asks if Beaumarchais ever referred to America in his plays, and Meredith asks what role his imagination as a dramatist might have played in the Revolution.
Mm. So about the references to America, maybe Bob knows more about this, but I'm not sure if there are any. I don't think so. Unger does not explicitly say
Mm-hmm.
that there are references to America, but there
Hmm.
are a lot of references to the ideals of the American Revolution.
Yes, yes.
And
And
it,
yeah,
yeah.
and both the Figaro plays take place in Madrid because he doesn't want anyone in France thinking he's talking about the French.
Exactly. Yeah. So he is secretly criticizing the French system while also celebrating the American new ideals through his plays.
Hmm.
And one is written, for instance, just after the Boston Massacre. And he found that a very unjust moment and wants to write something about more just societies.
Yeah.
He's directly inspired. It's written at this particular
Hmm.
period in time where you can see direct inspiration. He's not
Hmm.
mentioning it directly, though. And then the
Hmm.
second part of the question on
His
yeah,
imagination
his
as a dramatist.
imagination, the answer is absolutely yes. I'm
Hmm.
sure Bob agrees. When you read this
Yes.
book,
Yeah.
there's a lot of moments when the King Louis XV or the 16th asks him to find one of these sort of dangerous figures that wants to publish secret things on them, which
Right.
will create a huge scandal. No one can find them, apparently. They're all hiding. But Beaumarchais knows the right people, can get into these networks, can
Hmm.
himself pretend. He's pretending often. He's disguising himself. He's having new names. His
Hmm.
name is Caron de Beaumarchais. De Beaumarchais, by the way, added because he got married for like 9 months to
Yeah.
a particular aristocrat
Mm.
woman. But so his actual name is Caron, but then he often calls himself how if change the name, it's Norak or something like that. Like
Yeah, 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 yeah.
changes it.
Backwards to backwards,
Yeah,
yes.
backwards. And so he becomes this really intriguing figure that just really does everything to stay secret, to get into all
Hmm.
these intrigues. And his imagination often also gets him out of these moments when he actually
Hmm.
becomes endangered himself. For instance, when he's imprisoned by a lot of different scandals that are sort of invented around his person because
Hmm.
people want to get rid of him, he starts to write beautiful letters to
Hmm.
plead for his
Yes, yes.
release. And he appeals to, he knows, first he gets angry, then he realizes,
Hmm.
wait, if I'm going to just say, this is a larger cause, this is all
Hmm.
not
Yeah, yeah.
your fault
Hmm.
either. He's a great writer and he knows
Yes.
how to do that. Yeah.
And he knows a lot about drama, playing a part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about, with Louis the 15th, there was the scandal involving Madame du Barry, and he tracks down this journalist who had written these things about her being a prostitute. So he goes to England to recover all the copies of this, and then the king never rewards him. The king dies of
Oh,
smallpox
yeah.
before he can
Yeah.
actually reward him. And then, so he wants to get paid for this, and then there appears this mysterious Angelucci who has a similar thing. He's writing about Marie Antoinette. And so the king, of course, wants to stop this. And he goes off on this mission, winds up in Austria.
Mhm.
And then the Austrians don't think that any of this is true. They think he's kind of making this whole story up as a way of getting Louis the 16th to pay him what Louis the 15th does. What do you think? Do you think Angelucci Atkinson existed, or did Beaumarchais make this story up as a way of getting what he was owed by the previous monarch?
I have to say, when I read that particular part, I was like, "Ooh, maybe Beaumarchais," because he apparently found the person that wrote about Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette that couldn't get children and the whole
Yeah,
scandal and
yeah,
inventions around
yeah,
that matter. Um, but I guess it sounded more like he found the man, he sort of stopped him, he paid him,
yeah,
he wouldn't publish. But it sounded a bit like he just invented the old other side because he
yeah,
starts to write to the king like, "Listen, I'm gonna find him for you because he escaped, and
yes,
I
yeah.
will give my life if I need to," very all over the top.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
there's this
He
whole
tracks him down in a wood and he gets stabbed by the guy, but no one else sees this. And there's,
exactly. And then there's a report of the Austrian government that is like, it looks like he just put a knife on his own head.
yeah, yeah.
Which I mean, I think Unger is not addressing that much. He could have
Mm.
been sort of
Yeah.
digging a bit further to
Mm.
address, like, hey, wait, is this true or is it
Mm.
his way? Because Louis the 15th had told him, if you do this for me at the time, the other thing,
Mm.
I will. Because he had been in a lot of other legal
Yeah.
problems, he would give him full sort of civility back. He would
Yeah.
get full civilian status back, which means he could do things again.
Yes.
And then Louis
Yes.
XVI promised him that too, but it sounded a bit like he needed a bit more drama to
Mm.
get for real Louis XVI attention. Um,
Okay.
and I would love to see sometime more research on these type of elements where you're like, how much did Beaumarchais invented his own life and
Yeah.
it a bit more dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you going to do that?
Who knows? Who knows? I,
Who knows?
I I do think it's a great story. It's such a
Really is.
yeah.
There, there are a lot of pieces to it, and it really helps. It shows us this extraordinary period and what was happening in it. And we've mentioned these ideas of, is it the ideas of liberty? And he does have this class resentment against the aristocracy. What happens to him during the French Revolution?
So you would think that maybe because he was a commoner, became despised by aristocrats, but then kind of embraced the aristocrats and wanted to be them. So
Hmm.
it's a very complicated figure. And so during the French Revolution, he becomes quite despised by the revolutionaries because he had built a very large mansion, apparently, like very
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
ostentatious, next to the Bastille, funny enough,
Hmm.
symbolically.
Yeah,
But apparently it was one of the grandest mansions of Paris at the time,
Mm,
and people thought he was too much showing off his wealth. And even if he was not an aristocrat, he was still despised for that fact. And I
mm,
think if at least reading Unger's book, you think that it's really a moment there he started to feel absolutely, apparently, according to this, very
mm,
depressed because he's like, I
mm.
always fought for justice. I always fought for my
Yeah.
own justice. And here I find myself turned against. He got imprisoned. He was forced to
Mm.
flee. He was an immigré. How do you call that? Someone that had to leave France.
Yes.
He saved himself there, but he was also involved again in sort of a scheme to buy Dutch weapons for the French
Mm.
army, which didn't work out for him.
Yeah.
So he became someone very despised by most people he would probably be quite close to if they would have let him. And so
Hmm.
he then, after the French Revolution, though, he's able to return back to France. He can restore, and that is an interesting part. He was very impoverished, but he had, of course, being Beaumarchais, put money apparently secretly in Switzerland while
Hmm.
saying he had time
Yeah.
to put it somewhere. And
Yeah.
even if he had no money left officially, he had gold stacked
Hmm.
somewhere secret. So he was able to restore that huge home that he had and to
Hmm.
live there with his family. And so he
Hmm.
was never I mean, all the money he could have made by doing all these deals with America, he did not get reimbursed for, but he was still able to live quite well. And then even in moments of serious poverty, sort of on
Hmm.
paper, he was still able to actually have quite some funds. So I think that's an
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
interesting part.
It really is. And he's born in the same year as Washington, dies in the same year as Washington, which is an interesting parallel to their
Yes,
lives.
exactly. Yeah, and shows you also the longer story of that French-American alliance that's often remembered at 1 year, which is 1781, Yorktown.
Yeah.
And by looking at Washington's entire life, you're also going to realize he's done the same war, the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War in America.
Right.
He even sort of ignited it in a way.
Yes.
But so the story of the French-American alliance really starts at as well the beginning of Washington's military career is a
Hmm.
moment when most military careers of most men that will end up in America also start. So in order to tell the full story, you really need to start in the 1750s. And that's
Right.
exactly what this book is also doing through another angle, which I think makes it very interesting because we often look
Hmm.
at it through the military lens. This is the
Hmm.
diplomatic trade commercial
Hmm.
slash military lens too, but it's
Hmm.
really another side of a story that is very often just not
Yeah.
mentioned at all.
And using a character like Beaumarchais, who's fascinating for a lot of reasons, and there are a lot of funny stories in the book and fascinating stories in the book, really does help us to reimagine that and see this really complicated transatlantic relationship.
And also what is one of the things you can realize is most sometimes today people said, oh, the French really supported for beautiful republicanism
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
ideas. There's a lot of interest in there for
Yeah.
the French interest being financial for a
Hmm.
big part as well, and geopolitical and reclaiming their own power. So
Right.
it shows through the eyes of Beaumarchais the other motives for supporting the
Hmm.
French,
Hmm.
the American Revolution.
Yeah. Now, what first drew you to the study of the American Revolution?
So for me, it was really a personal story when I was 4 years old. I was very young. But so I grew up in France. So I'm from the Netherlands, but my parents bought a home in Burgundy. And I grew up under a big tree called a tulip poplar tree, but it was called the Lafayette tree. And so I thought I was always in the presence of a tree planted by Lafayette after the American Revolution. But later I found that that was not true, but that was his uncle that had brought the tree back
Mm.
or the tree to France from America. And that
Hmm.
uncle was called Châteauroux. And several years later, that led me to meet the owner of the Château de Châteauroux close by, and then to discover with him a huge collection of papers that were about 6,000 pages, and these papers were
Hmm.
kept in an archive but unknown to historians, quite
Hmm.
unknown to the family themselves. And so that led me to then wanting to study the role of Châteauroux in the American Revolution through about 2,000 pages of his private collection on the American
Wow.
Revolution,
Hmm.
revealing many things,
Hmm.
including actually that whole period we've been discussing today.
Yes.
because he was very involved from the Seven Years' War, where he was an officer, to all these secret dealings and observations and
Mm,
sendings of agents, restructuring and reforming the French army he was part of.
mm,
He's really part of the full French-American alliance,
mm, mm,
all the way up to standing side by side with
mm.
Washington at Yorktown.
Yeah,
And
wow.
so it was really the tree that led me to
Mm.
the whole story.
That's great. Okay. We do have a couple of questions from our viewers. One, um, Robert wants to know who contributed more to the American cause, France or Spain,
That's always the tough question that's asked, but I would
or
say,
the Dutch?
or the Dutch. Well, of course, the Dutch by far, but no, that's not true. I would say that the French, so there's always that debate who contributed more. I would say you have to make decisions. What is contributing more? Is it giving more funds? Is it sending more
Hmm.
ships? Is it sending more troops? Is it the more direct influence, such as France sending actual army to America? Is it particular fleet of Spain that spread the British out more, that led to Pensacola, leading to, all these different
Hmm.
questions. In numerous, in like the how do you call it? Like the numbers, France contributed more money, more
Hmm.
troops,
Hmm.
and so on. But it was an important alliance that they had with the Spanish. The Spanish
Hmm.
did not have a direct alliance like the French did with the Americans. The Spanish had a direct alliance with France. So there was something called
Hmm.
Bourbon alliance. The two Bourbon
Hmm.
kings had allied already during the Seven Years' War. And that alliance was very crucial for their cooperation. And you can see that with Beaumarchais, when he
Hmm.
starts his fake sort of trade company that actually is bringing weapons to America, Rodrigue and Hortalez, it's called.
Yeah.
1 million is given by the French crown, or loaned, it's a loan,
Yes.
give by the French crown, and 1 million is given by the Spanish crown. So it's a joint endeavor, it's a joint risk these both
Hmm.
monarchies are taking at the time, and they want to keep it very secret at the beginning. So
Yeah.
Spain played an important role, even if France
Mm.
played a more direct role, I would say.
Thank you. And someone asks what role the transatlantic slave trade played during this period. I mean, that's a huge question. We could spend a couple of hours on, or a few
Yeah,
hours on it.
if not weeks. But
Weeks, yes.
um, going back to the specific book, Unger does mention a particular moment where Beaumarchais is sent. So this is like after the Seven Years' War.
Mm,
It's in a business venture with this particular
mm,
courtier that is sending him. Because as Bob has mentioned, he is actually going to Spain to take revenge for his sister for his love story. But then
mm,
he starts to be involved in sort of creating a monopoly for trade between Louisiana and France, because Louisiana at the time has become a Spanish colony. And so he's very much involved in slave trade at that time,
mm,
because that was sort of a hub of the slave trade. And France wanted to participate, or France is not this particular
mm,
individual, wanted to partake in that again. And so
mm.
this is the interesting story where, of course, slavery is always involved. If you talk about trade, it's
Yes.
not necessarily with Rodrigue and Hortalez because it's
Mm,
about shipping weapons, but what is
mm,
sometimes not always, because often the ships were supposed to give a lot of stuff back to France.
yeah,
Often
right.
was not the case, but these are, of course, the result of trade labor. So if they get tobacco and sugar
Right.
back, it's not directly that there were
Mhm.
enslaved people on the boats, but they had been producing these things. So there's always slavery involved
Yes.
in anything you're going to discuss during the
Mm,
18th century, and
yes.
especially shipping. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, they're going to the West Indies. So France's wealthiest colony was Saint-Domingue. And then,
Mm,
so you have a tremendous French interest in the slavery and the slave trade in the West Indies, too. That's-
absolutely.
Um, yes. So, um, any final thoughts on, I mean, what it's like to take a book like this and write a new foreword to reintroduce it to an audience?
Well, I feel honored to do it because it's one of the books I really used quite a lot, of course, during my PhD. So it's one of
Mm,
these moments when someone's asking you to do that. And thank you, Bob, for putting me in touch to do this. But what I liked is just to reread it and realize what a great story this is. So if you're
really
interested in
is.
knowing what happened before, what is more known, which is from 1778 up until Yorktown, to go back to that period prior to it, full of intrigues, full of secrets, full of agents and spies and scandals. I
Yes.
think it's a very interesting book and it's entertaining. It's not too long either, so you can read it in just a few days. And I think it really adds to your comprehension on French-American alliance prior to that actual alliance that you might know of. So I think it's a good discovery. You might have known of the Mariage de Figaro play, for instance, or at least heard of
Yes.
that. But then understanding that this man has almost on his own created a trade empire to provide many guns, weapons, gunpowder, and so on that really kept the Continental Army afloat for years. He is one of these figures that should be more remembered.
Well, and thank you for what you've done to help us remember. And thank you to Harlow Unger and to Brandeis University Press for bringing the story back. And so thank you so much, Iris.
Well, thank you so much for the conversation. And I saw someone saying they want to hear more from Bob himself. So maybe
Okay, well,
we can do
next
that
time.
next time.
Yes. You can interview me. So
Exactly. That's exactly
now,
what I wanted to say.
great. Now I'll turn it over to Susan Spurlock from the Ford Hall Forum.
Well, thank you so much for that conversation. That was really great. And what an improbable story. So interesting. So thank you, Iris. Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate your time. So thank you and have a good evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.